Alrighty, we're on.
Johnny,
Hello, Sonny Brown.
how's it going, mate?
I'm well. So I'm here with Sonny Brown of the Sonny Brown Breakdown, and we're sitting here in the beautiful Apex MMA Training Centre up in Brookvale.
That's right.
So I guess let's start there first.
Mm-hmm.
I always like to then pull it back and understand how you got to this point. But I think you guys only opened December 15th, was it?
Yeah, 16th.
16th.
Yep.
There you go. And the reason why I remember that date is because War on the North Shore was only just before it.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the guys who trains out of here, Ben White, Benny the Great White, they call him, the shark.
Yep.
He was talking about how it's been in his post-fight speech when he won the title. He was saying it's been a bit hectic, but he was pretty excited about the whole change and things changing. So I guess let's talk a little bit about that first. So used to train out of Langs.
Mm-hmm.
And then Langs is no more, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Yep. And so then how did this sort of come
So
up?
basically he, he's been in the game for a long time, starting 94, I think it was, or something like that, and had basically decided to retire.
Mm-hmm.
And so therefore we knew that there would be an opportunity to open up in this area. So Northern Beaches is very dense with competition, and we probably would never have considered opening up otherwise. But with Anthony retiring, it seemed like a good chance to actually do something, and then also to kind of keep the flame alive of the all the people, the friends that we'd made through the years training there, and try and kind of keep people together as much as we possibly could.
Yep. So when you decided, and you got a business partner in this as well, right?
Yeah, so Nick Pudney
Mm-hmm.
is the business partner in Apex MMA, and then we also have another head coach, Chad Lumley, who've both been with Anthony for 15 to 20 to 30 years, or however long it's been, long
Yep.
time.
Yep. So I guess from when you guys decided, hey, we're going to do this, to December 16th, like how long was that gestation period?
Oh, not long enough. It's hard to remember back because it all happened relatively quickly, I
Yep.
guess. So it was really like we got into the building, say, in November. So it was like a month or like 5 weeks or something like that of just hectic, here every day.
Clean up,
Tear down, demolish, and then rebuild from scratch pretty much, as there was a lot of work that needed to be done to actually get it into a serviceable fashion.
Yep.
So it was a very busy November, December period for us.
Yep. And all the mats and everything are all brand new. Like was there anything that you guys managed to carry over from Langs, or?
Not a lot, because obviously he, probably knew he was retiring, so there wasn't, that much that we could carry over, and we wanted to start fresh as well.
Yep.
Wanted to, different look and kind of just set the vibe
Yep.
of a new establishment as well.
Yep. And then how did the name Apex come about?
It pretty much turned into just let's pick something generic, and then the name can get its meaning from the work we put into it. Because I think if we had our ways, I'd be calling it Sonny's, Sonny's Breakdown Emporium, and Nick's may have been Nick Pudney's Beat 'em Up Shop or something like that. So we compromise, and something generic's good in that it really is more the people here, and then what you turn into the name than the actual name itself, I think. So that's where we kind of settled. So we had a bit of a list of a couple of generic ones, and we thought this one will do.
Yeah, fair enough. Now, before we go back in time a little bit, we just did a gi class just before, and I wanted to just ask you about some of the influences that influence your teaching style.
Yep.
And I guess how do you then go about, and this is probably going to touch on a few different things, because you might go into the train alter programming and things like that, but how does that sort of how do you structure your own coaching and teaching side of things?
Yeah. So in terms of on a lesson, one thing I'm trying to do now is give more game and goal-orientated rounds to people that focus more on the principles of the technique than the actual step-by-step replication of technique itself. So more discovery-based learning as much as possible, while still giving some foundation of a traditional technique on its own. There are some people who have gone completely discovery based and with an ecological design approach, and it's just all games based, and they won't give too much direct instruction, which I think is great. But at the moment, I'm still just trying to work a bit of a blend or a hybrid and see how that goes for the time being. So. Obviously big influences in terms of coaching style would be Anthony Lang, my coach. Then I've also spent a lot of time working with Liam Reznikov and seeing how he would coach. And then various other coaches who also are Apex, like Nick Pudney himself is also an influence. And then external influences, a lot of different people. So some of it is just educational theory. The spectrum of teaching styles is one thing that looks at, there's a wide range of different styles of teaching that you can make different classes. So, some is just theory based. And then in terms of jiu-jitsu, I'd say probably Preet Mickelson put me on a different path on which then opened up a lot of those discovery based stuff as well.
Yep. And then for you as a practitioner, how would you describe your learning style? So everybody's got a slightly different learning style. I think, they talk about some people are kinesthetic, some people can do it by rote, memorization. Some people do it. There's all different types of learning styles. Some people have to hear it, some people have to see it, some people have to do it.
Yep.
What, I guess for you, as you've gone throughout your training, like what have you found to be the style that works best for you?
Sure. So I actually so the idea of individual learning styles is actually, it's a bit of a myth. So it's something that they'll refer to as a neuromyth, and that it's just a myth about the brain, I guess, is an easier way to put it. But a lot of that research was done in the 70s and hasn't really bore any kind of fruits when it's replicated. Now, that doesn't mean to say that there's no value in looking at a class or looking at individual students like that, but the reason for it is slightly different. So while we might think of some people, are not auditory learners. Now, that's not to say that their brain does not have the capacity to learn in an auditory manner, but they may just have a certain preference. And I think why they might have a certain preference is the bigger question. And then that comes down to it being engaging. So I think that everyone has it's like the brain is not wired differently for individual people, that they can't learn in a certain manner. They can, but is the information you're giving them engaging enough in terms of their personal and cultural context that allows them to engage with the material and then be able to digest it and learn it. So where you'll see a lot of teachers will have positive results by looking at students and saying, and changing things up and saying, oh, well, this person's got a different learning style. Let me, if they're not learning, through auditory methods, then maybe we'll get up and run around or something like that and change it to a kinesthetic approach. And really what might be happening is that particular lecture they might be giving was boring and not engaging enough. And then it's not that changing the delivery mechanism is allowing their brains to learn it in a different manner, but rather that it's created a whole new way that they've engaged with the student, and then being able to be engaging is the primary factor.
Yep. Okay. All right. Well, let's wind it all back, and so people can get a bit of an understanding about who Sonny Brown is. So, where did you grow up?
Northern Beaches.
Okay.
So grew up in Eleanor Heights, which is near Narrabeen. So I grew up in the Northern Beaches, and now that's where the gym is as well. Yep. So I ventured a bit out of there, but it is called the Insular Peninsula,
yeah,
for a reason. So we're back here.
So, and I think we're a similar age. You're an 84 boy as well.
Yeah,
born in 84.
June.
Yeah, so yep. I'm February, so I'm 39 next month, and you'll be 39 in June.
Yeah.
So, for you growing up on the Northern Beaches, like, I guess, what are some of your earliest memories?
Going to the beach, I'd say, would be a good one. So like definitely, like, let's go to down at Narrabeen Beach. The Coca-Cola Surf Classic was a competition that my dad would often marshal and work for. So that was a yearly competition held at Narrabeen Beach that had it was the pro surf league, so it had a lot of the top, or all of the top surfers in the world at that time.
Yep.
And that was 90 early 90s. So I was very young, and then working there, I remember getting to meet all these surfers and stuff like that. So, I think I've got a signed Frisbee of Kelly Slater at home somewhere.
Oh, wow.
And, and meeting, it was all the top surfers. And I remember Sonny Garcia was a surfer that I was happy to meet because he had the same name as me.
Yep.
He was a Hawaiian. And so that, like, a lot of time spent on the beach would be a big thing.
Yep. Have you got siblings?
2 older brothers.
Okay. And so how was that family dynamic at home for you being the youngest?
They are twins, so they were very much, they had their own, they had their connection, and then, but as twins do, and me. Yeah, exactly.
So do they often gang up on you or sort of exclude you?
A little bit. I mean, I don't know if it was so much exclusion as it was just they were a tighter bond being twins. You know?
They're so in sync.
In sync, exactly.
Yep. And then from the way your parents treated you guys, then were you the more endearing one? Because there's 2 of those ones. There's only one Sonny.
Yeah. Oh, geez. I don't know.
I'm speculating here.
Yeah. Look, I don't know about that. Yeah, I haven't thought about that in a while, I guess. No, I mean they were good parents, and I very much respect them, and a lot of respect for my dad and what he's done in his life. And I couldn't say that it was bad at all, or there was any sort of issues with that.
No, I would have thought they would have given you more attention because of the twins are twins, like.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, that's a tough one.
Yeah, that is a tough one.
I'm winding back the clock in my head, trying to think.
Okay, so then when it came to schooling, so do you have any memories of primary school? Like, what was that experience like for you?
Yeah. So I mean, I guess it was pretty normal. So I went to a local primary school that I could walk to, which may not be as normal, but we used to walk, down the bush track. We used to go, so that was, just from our house to the school was just a, which may not be as common for many people, but nature reserves and stuff like that we could walk through to get to school, which is pretty nice, considering looking back on it now. But yeah, it was, just played a lot of sport in school, and yeah, that was probably the main things. Like, definitely did a lot of sport back then: cross country, running, basketball, football. That was a big part of school.
Did you have any favourites?
It was always the football team.
Yep.
Because there was always a good group of us, and friends. And
yeah.
That was always fun.
Yep. No, fair enough. And then as a student, like, how would your teachers have described you in primary school?
Probably full of potential, may not reach it. It's probably the same as we are now,
It's always funny when you think back on those things.
Yeah.
Okay, and then what about high school? So what was high school like for you?
So high school went to Manly High, which is again, just up the road from here. Haven't gone far. And again, that was a lot of sport based, but of course then gets more serious into, the HSC thing. So subject selection becomes a bigger issue. And then also, I guess, the social side of things becomes a bigger thing in that
factor,
that time. Yeah.
Yep. So then in terms of like, if you think about like different high school groups, like what sort of group were you in? How would you describe it?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I think it was very different there, because it was, I don't know, because we played football, so we're in the football team, but it was a selective school, so it was more academically based. Even though everyone at the time you didn't realize it, but yeah. So
I just want to pause on that, because isn't that an interesting thing, right? So I went to a selective school as well. And so the culture, I would say, in our school was like, it wasn't cool to be stupid.
Yeah.
It was actually cool if you were smart.
Yeah.
Whereas that isn't necessarily the same experience that a lot of other people get. Often being the smart one gets you singled out, gets you picked on. Whereas, being the dumb one, so to speak, is what would get you, singled out in a selective school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it was an interesting dynamic, but the friends I've made there, I still keep in touch with. On a weekly basis, caught up with a big group of them in December for Christmas.
Yep.
And so still keeping in touch with everyone.
Yep. That's pretty cool, isn't it? 22 years on.
It's a long time, yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. And then in high school, like, so what subjects did you study?
Oof.
Do you remember for the HSC?
Yeah, I remember doing business studies. That's all I remember.
Obviously, you would have done English and maths.
Yeah, English, maths, and I was trying to think of the electives, business studies, maybe geography, and that's been a while.
Yep. Did you have any idea what you wanted to do when you finished high school?
At the time, it was something in IT because that was around the time of the first
Early 2000s.
Yeah. So that seemed like a good option in terms of financial stability. So it was just something in that area. But at the time, I didn't feel like going to university immediately after high school, as I just didn't want to.
Yep.
So I did like TAFE courses in network management and then some Microsoft and Cisco courses, which allowed me to immediately just go into the workforce for IT.
Yep. Okay. So first job, what was your first job?
First job after high school was in working at a computer shop, I believe it was.
Yep.
Before then, I worked in a factory at the end of a conveyor belt, taking screen printed T-shirts off the conveyor belt as they came through a dryer, and then stacking them in a pile. That was probably my first job, or a paper run before then, I think.
Was that? Did you find that interesting?
It was interesting just to see how things worked in a warehouse, I guess, and interesting just to see the dynamics of all the people working there and see how some people were happy doing it and some people weren't. I'd say that was something that stuck out with me.
Yep.
Where you could see some people were
really
fine, were happy, that was, living the dream, and then other people were very much not content with having to do what they're doing, and it was just like, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. Okay. So then, when you went into IT, like where did the martial arts fit into all this?
That just pretty much made it like living the real life Fight Club, I would say. So, especially when I was fighting and working in network management, there was quite a few occasions where I came in, especially after some fights with black eyes and cuts and stuff like that. Yeah. And it did remind me of those scenes in Fight Club with Edward Norton, rocking up, and I always took it as interesting about who would ask how you got the black eye and who wouldn't. And I respected the people who asked more. And then I always got a bit sus about the people who didn't, because I'm like, well, how did you think? If you didn't ask me, you don't know. What are you filling the gap with? And is it you just think I got mouthy and got smacked or something? Yeah. So that was interesting. But I was lucky in that all the employers didn't seem to mind too much, and I was able to do that fine.
Okay. So what age did you start martial arts?
So I guess I actually started late, right? In terms of, it was after high school, probably like 24 or something like that.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so that late.
Yeah.
So then were you doing anything active before that? Apart from obviously footy and things like that at school?
Yeah. So, just all the regular team sports as such. And I had, but probably after high school until I started training, it was probably wasn't doing any sports, so that was one of the reasons to start martial arts.
So, okay, was there another catalyst for why you?
Yeah, so there was a big catalyst in that when I was in high school. I think it was year 11, year 12. I got attacked going home from a house party that was happening nearby my house. Wow. So it was one of those parties that got gate crashed, typical northern beaches, a couple of hundred people show up. And then as I was walking home, I blacked out. And then what had happened is I'd been attacked in that time. And then when I came to, I was a couple of kilometers away from my house, or a couple of streets away maybe, and walking one way up a dead-end street covered in blood. And so while, as the blackout had happened, was I'd been attacked and, had been covered in blood. And then I went home, turned around, knew something was wrong, walked home. I remember looking at myself in the mirror and just seeing covered in blood head to toe, and knowing something was wrong. Foolishly went to bed after that, and then woke up in the morning and looked at my pillow. It was covered in blood. Mum actually woke me up going, why is the bathroom covered in blood? And I say, give me a couple of moments to clean. I didn't want her to see me just drenched in blood. Yep. And then got up, went to the local hospital, then got rushed to Royal North Shore, put in intensive care, as I'd had a skull fracture and a subdural hematoma.
Wow.
That from from that attack. So there was still a few years between then and when I started training martial arts, but I think, you know, after that I definitely like lost a lot of confidence and lost a lot of I'd just say confidence, and then definitely regained that through training martial arts.
So did you ever have any like nightmares about it?
Never really nightmares. It was just like losing confidence and being not as sure of myself in waking confrontations, or not even waking confrontations, but just like waking social situations, like even, you know, dealing with angry customers or something. That would probably just not being sure that you could
Manage yourself.
Yeah. So that was probably led to loss of confidence, and that would, so I'd say that was the main thing. I'd probably be happy to be having nightmares, and that means that I'm probably could remember my dreams. So that would be probably be a good thing.
I used to get these pretty vivid dreams, you know, when I was in high school, and that it's like you're fighting with somebody and you punch as hard as you could, and it feels like it does no damage, and you just feel so helpless. Like, you know, sometimes it would be like it wasn't necessarily fighting with someone else. Sometimes it was like fighting a ghost or something like that.
Yep.
Right, and it would be like you know, I'd pick up a baseball bat in my dream, and I'd swing as hard as I could, but when I hit, it was just like a pillow, right? And then you know, for me, it was quite interesting because I feel like, you know, I probably I twitch a lot when I sleep, and my wife would tell me that because and I do remember, you know, there was occasions where like I'd be fighting so hard in my dream trying to make an impact or hurt this other thing that my leg would twitch in real life, and I'd kick the wall, and it would wake me up because I'd kicked the wall that hard that I was like, oh shit, did I just put a hole in the wall? Yeah. But like, you know, I'd have this struggle of like, you know, not knowing whether it's like you know, you're not confident about your abilities.
Yep.
Right. And I think, you know, once you get involved in martial arts, at least, you know, from my experience, once I started doing martial arts and doing things that, you know, put you in those difficult places, you know, I never had those dreams again. I already knew that I could put somebody out, or I could hurt somebody, or I could do this and I could do that. But I was just curious, you know, after you have an experience like that, like, was the fracture on the front or the back of your head?
It was down one of the sides, I think. So down here somewhere.
Do you think you were king hit or something? And
must have been, yeah. So it was just a black, you know, I blacked out. I just don't have memory of it. Yeah.
And then you just, you know, when the next thing you know, when you came to, you're walking down some dead end street.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. Oh, geez. And so then, how long was the recovery from that?
I mean, I don't really remember exactly like how long till a full recovery.
Yep.
It's a
blur.
It's a blur now. It's a blur. Yeah.
So when you're 17, so yeah, that would have been like year 11, year 12. Like, did that impact your HSC at all?
Yeah, I mean, they talked about like they gave the option of, you know, taking the time off, repeating a year or something like that, and but I didn't want to. Yep. I just wanted to keep going and get it done.
Get it out of the way.
But I remember that those were some of the options available at the time.
Yeah, wow. Okay. So then let's go back to when you started in IT. So you did network management at TAFE. How did you find the TAFE experience?
I mean, I guess it was good. You know, overall positive. I met another close friend there now who I still talk to, you know, and consider a lifelong friend. So that was good. That was good in that terms, and it made it made practical sense what they were teaching us, and just, you know, also got my foot in the door at the first job. So it was helpful, and yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I always found you know, I was fortunate enough to go to TAFE as well because I did a mechanical apprenticeship. And I found the teaching style so totally different between TAFE and uni. And TAFE was always very hands-on, practical. You know, like I studied engineering at university, and I'd sort of make this joke with my other friends that, you know, they don't even know how to use a spanner because you don't get taught how to use a spanner at engineering in university. Yeah. You know, you spend your time doing calculations and how do you do this and that versus, you know, when you're at TAFE, it's like, okay, here's an engine. Okay, this is what we're doing today. We're pulling the head off, or we're doing this and that. And so it's very practical in terms of how you approach things.
Yep.
So, you know, I actually found that the TAFE style of learning resonated more for me. I found that more interesting than the university style of learning.
Yep.
So that was just my experience with it. But
yeah. No, I mean, it's definitely more practical. I think, I think that's the benefit of it. And I think the course was maybe only a year, and then I was able to work. So that was, you know, it's a good option.
Yep. Okay. So how did you find that first job? Like when you started to move into the IT field, like did you enjoy it? What was it? Did you, what did you pick up from that experience?
I think probably the biggest thing I learned from it is that despite your best intentions of being like nice to every customer, because it was customer facing, so it was computer repair, but also, you know, a customer facing role and dealing with the individuals who have problems with their computer. And and a big thing was, despite, if you know, you can have the intention of being nice to everyone, but that is not going to stop them from getting angry at you and yelling at you for various reasons, and that it's no, you know, you need more than good intentions, and that is the management of expectations that you give people. That's really what is the biggest thing in helping, you know, keep communication clear so there's no misunderstanding.
Did you get caught out with any of that when you first started?
Oh yeah, so like just, you know, like all the time, and it's just a learning process, which was basically, you know, it was, even if you know, I remember one example is just, you know, letting people know when things will be ready. If there's a change, you being the person to call them makes a big difference, to tell them about the change, than them calling you up to ask if there's been a change.
Yeah.
So that's, you know, just being proactive in setting those expectations was a huge thing to learn, and makes sense when you put yourself in the other position as well. Yeah.
I used to always tell that to my salespeople and staff as one of the mentoring sessions. It's like, if you're in a war and you got two options, you can either be the guy that's hiding in the bushes or the person that's walking through the bushes. Which would you choose? Well, you'd want to be the guy that's hiding in the bushes, because then you can choose when you attack, right? So basically, if you're the one on the front foot making the phone call to the customer and saying, hey, there's been a delay, or there's this or there's that, you're on the front foot. The other person's being caught off guard, and then they're more likely to turn around and say, oh, okay, that's unfortunate, but okay, I can understand. Thank you for calling me.
Exactly.
Right? Whereas if they're calling you and saying, why haven't you called me yet? You told me it was going to be ready at 4 o'clock. It's now 5:30. Then, you know, like you've now become that deer in the headlights, right?
Exactly.
So,
exactly.
Yeah, that was the analogy I used to use. But
100%. Yeah, that's the same thing I was referring to. So I think, yeah, it just makes such a big difference and just learning that, realizing like, oh no, but I didn't mean to do anything wrong. So, you know, I was just trying to, you know, that doesn't matter. Yeah. You know, you could have great intentions, you know, doesn't matter. It's those expectations that you've set. And if you meet them and manage them, that's all that matters in that respect.
Yep. Okay. So how long did you stay in that field for?
I guess, well, I worked in IT for 10 years. I think I worked at that job maybe 3 years or 4 years or something like that. But yeah, overall it was 10 years in IT doing computer repair to start off with, and then moved into network management, or network admin. Yep.
And then what did you do after that?
So after that, I did 1 year of IT sales. So I was selling computers and stuff like that, which was just an attempt to try and change things up a bit. And then I left that and went to uni to do a teaching degree. So I did Bachelor of Education in Physical Health and Education. Okay. For basically to be a high school PE teacher.
Okay. And what was the catalyst for that? Like, it's obviously a very different industry compared to what you were doing.
Yeah. So one thing was just the office work involved in IT, just 9 to 5 in an office, wasn't very appealing to do for another 30 years. And so I wanted to, look for a change. I'd spent I think it was 3 years prior to that sales job, I was working at a local school doing network management for them. And it was just seeing, you know, okay, this looks like a reasonable job to do, in terms of, you know, there is holidays, you know, and just also for PE, you do get to spend some time out, you know, on the ovals and stuff like that, outside moving around. It did seem like a good job to transition into, try to, and both my parents are actually teachers as well. Oh, okay. So, you know, that seemed like a good thing to move into. And then, of course, there was the Here Comes the Boom MMA movie. I don't know if you remember that.
Here Comes the Boom.
This was just a joke, but a Kevin James movie where he's a teacher and an MMA fighter. So
okay.
Yeah.
I think I'm thinking of Never Back Down.
Could be the same story. I
don't know. Okay, so was there a teacher or anything like that might have inspired that move as well? Like, I guess, you know, did you have a good PE teacher in high school that? or any teachers that you were very fond of in high school?
Yeah, I mean there was a few teachers who were just good people, and you know I'd get along with quite well. So I think certainly they were a good role model, I guess, to set. But it was probably just then my parents being the inspiration for it. Also, just seeing how they were, as parents, able to take us away during school holidays a lot, and give us good holidays to the beach and stuff like that. And then as you get older, realize, that's not possible for a lot of different people.
It's work-life balance.
Yeah, it's work-life balance. When you see, like, you work in an office and people have to bring their kids into the office during school holidays and stuff like that, and realizing, that's when we were lucky enough to go to the beach, and realizing that was a good, it was good of them to be able to do that.
Absolutely. When you talk about teachers, I just had this horrible memory of me being a brat to a teacher, when I was in high school, and I can't even remember the teacher's name. He was a substitute teacher, but anyway, obviously, me being a bit of a dick at that age, and this teacher obviously took offence to it and decided to call me up on it, and I said something really horrible to him because he was putting me down first, and then I said something, something along the lines of, like, you're not going to be anything or whatever. And then I said something like, at least I'm not a teacher.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like, when I think back on it now, I go, what a little arrogant prick. I would have slapped myself back then if I could meet myself back then.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's amazing how much your perspective shifts, because as you get older, you sort of realize that, so even like martial arts, right? There's a limited time that you can be at peak performance, right? And then if you want to have a career in martial arts after that, most likely opportunity is to move into teaching. Because if you're going to be an athlete, like, there's no real mixed martial arts athletes or athletes in most sports over the age of 50, unless you're doing curling or something like that. Sorry to anyone that does curling, lawn bowls.
Yeah,
they're the sports that I suppose you can do, but anything that involves athletic endeavour, you've got a fairly limited window in terms of when you can do that. And then what do you do after that? Well, most of those guys then, if they're really passionate about it, they go into coaching or they do something else in the industry related to that. So, and then even like for me working in the automotive industry, like, I realized that once you become a manager and a leader of people, your job's no longer actually about just doing the job. The job is now about educating other people. So you take on this role where you're trying to empower people and teach other people, or you don't. And if you don't, well, your people never get better, and eventually it comes to catch up with you, and you're just out of a job.
Yeah.
Right. So when you first move, like, I guess, okay, let's talk about two things. So the first thing is, what was it like studying teaching versus then trying to be a teacher?
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess that goes back to the question you mentioned about university and TAFE, really. So it's there's a lot of theory that is not useful on the practical side. The biggest thing I was missing out is we only did like a small amount of work on classroom management and behavioural management, which is how do you actually run a room, which is a good analogy for coaching, really. How do you run the classroom, which that really I guess, and there is probably only so much you can learn in a textbook about how that is best to be done. But that is mainly has to be learned hands-on kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I think, they are trying to experiment with a couple of different ways of doing like apprenticeship models where people will teach a couple of days a week or something like that while they're still studying, which I think is probably good, because I think, and you do practicals on, internships and stuff like that, because really, the classroom management side, which then enables you to be engaging, as a teacher and then deliver information, that really has to be learned hands-on.
Are there any best practice tips that you sort of come across over the years or through experience about how to manage a classroom and how that also resonates with coaching?
Yeah, and it probably is that setting expectations, expectations of behaviour and then sticking to it.
Yeah.
So it's like you're setting the expectations of the classroom, from the start, and then making sure that you hold people to that the whole way through. So there's probably is a link between all that.
Yep. And I think it's also being consistent in how you deliver your outcomes too, right? Like I think about that, obviously with my kids. That so I try and really explain to them, because I'm very big on this concept of when we're growing up, we're only sort of educated on things being good and bad, and we use that as the indicator as to what you should do and what you shouldn't do.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, I don't push your brother because that's bad because you're hurting him, right?
Yep.
Whereas it's like, I one of the things I try and reframe a lot nowadays is I focus on action and consequence. So, rather than thinking about, you pushing your brother as being a good or a bad thing, your action has a consequence,
Yeah.
right? So the consequence might be that he hurts himself, right? You
Yep.
push him, he falls on the ground, he dislocates his arm, which has happened, and he's in pain for a few days. Like, is that really the good outcome that you want? Are you going to feel good about yourself as a result of that? So trying to educate my kids more in terms of action and consequence, by doing this, you're going to get this. Is that the outcome that you want? And then having them think about it and then go, okay, well, no, that's not the outcome that I want. Okay, so what's the outcome that you want? Like, even, I'll give you an example that just came up last night. So my eldest daughter, Cadence, she's trying to learn some piano at the moment, and my wife has all the piano qualifications, so she does the teaching with her. And sometimes, Cadence gets very upset about it. And so my wife was like, if you're going to yell at me, I'm not going to teach you. And then essentially, there's tears. And so then I went and had a bit of a chat with her, and I said, look, can you tell me why you're upset? And she goes, because, I'm not good at it. And I said, well, who are you comparing yourself to? Why do you say that you're not good at piano, right? So in essence, it's the good and bad thing, right? So by saying she's not good, she's bad at piano. And then she goes, but mummy can play every song in the book. And she without even trying. And then I said, okay, so how old is mummy? And she's like, I don't know. And I'm like, well, mummy's 38, right? You're 6, right? So 38 less 6, she's 32 years older than you, right? And then I was like trying to explain to her, okay, last year was your first year of kindy. How long did that feel like a long time that you're in kindy? And she's like, yeah, well, when you're 5, 1 year is a fifth of your life, all right? It's 25% of your life that you're experiencing. So of course it's going to feel like a long time.
Yep.
And then I was trying to explain to her, well, now think that if 1 year of kindy was a very long time, mummy's had 32 more years of those than you. It's given her a lot of time to get good at things.
Yeah.
Right? But she didn't get good just by not doing it. She got good by making lots of mistakes. And so, trying to, it's weird when you try and articulate that to a 6-year-old.
Yeah.
Right? But it's the same thing, there's a lot of people that haven't built up that resilience, even, as adults coming into jiu-jitsu. They come in and they get frustrated because they go, why can't I do this move? Or why can't I do that move? And they feel uncoordinated, and that makes them self-conscious.
Yep.
Right? But it's like you got to work this muscle of resilience, right? I think resilience is also a muscle that you have to sort of put to the test and understand that, hey, it's only through making mistakes repeatedly over and over and over that you're actually going to start to improve and get better at things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think that's just, and people, especially coming to martial arts later in life, may not have had that challenge of learning a new skill. And even though, people can be very accomplished in their own fields and personal, professional life, they've become accomplished because they've become good at a certain area and probably experienced the setbacks in that learning process a long time ago. And so it's, even though they may have gone through that process of realizing that failure is required for growth, they may have gone through that process 10, 15 years ago and, and forgotten all those lessons, and it just needs to be remembered.
Yep. Yeah, it's interesting because I always credit my mum for this, because when I remember when I was in primary school, my mum would send me to all these extracurricular activities. So to be like, you got to do piano lessons, you got to do Chinese language classes, there's tutoring, there's all this typical, like, I guess what you call an Asian tiger mum, so to speak, right? And but when I got to high school, my experience was very different, where like my mum didn't really have these sorts of expectations anymore. It was like, okay, you do these things, but it's up to you how good or bad you are at these things. And so once I got to high school, like my grades slid pretty rapidly from year 7 to year 10 because I just, cared more about making friends and having fun and doing all that sort of stuff. But then it was like once I got to year 11, like there was 2 things that happened. One was that my mum then had some issues mental health wise. And so my parents had a bit of a tough time as well. And the other thing was, realizing that, hey, I probably need to put in some effort if I want to get a decent result. And what helped me back then was realizing that, hey, when I was in primary school and I did all of these different things and I was good at all these different things, it showed me that I had the capacity to do it.
Yep.
But what I needed to take away was having a choice. because if you have a choice between doing something difficult or doing something that's not difficult and can give you immediate reward and pleasure or whatever, because you're hanging out with mates and you're not really doing anything difficult,
Yeah.
People generally gravitate towards the easy thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? But then now it's like, okay, my parents aren't really getting along, things aren't good at home. Now I need something to focus on.
Yep.
And so then it became, okay, well, I'm going to focus on my study and I'm going to focus on my training. And then, as a result of that, you then end up in a pretty good place. Like that period for me from the end of high school to the pretty much the end of uni was like some of the hardest years of my life. Like I was training, 5 to 7 times a week. I was working and doing a mechanical apprenticeship. I was studying 2 degrees at uni. I was at TAFE 1 day a week, like all at one time. And when I finished all that, like people would be like, how did you fit all this in? And it's like, I didn't have a choice. Like to me, in my mind, there was no other choice but to just push through and finish it.
Yep.
Right. And I feel like that's a powerful tool, when you've got no choice but to go all in on something.
Yeah.
Because your back's against the wall. The only way that you can get out of it is by facing it and fighting it and going forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. So for you, in terms of what was your first experience like when you did end up in the classroom? Like, was there any standout kids that sort of you were like, oh, this is the naughty one,
Yes.
this is the good one?
But nah, I mean, it's kind of difficult to single anyone out. But I'd say, it took you back to remembering what it was like in high school for yourself, in that, there are so many different personalities and such in there and you can kind of see that reflected still just in, they obviously you're just in a different
capacity now.
Yeah. But there's still just those different personalities in the classroom.
Yep. So then how long were you teaching for?
So I was doing casual for, I guess it was maybe only a year and a bit. And then at the end of the midway through last year is when I started working with Alta, helping them with their syllabus, and just started doing that as well as coaching. Okay.
So for those people that don't know, so Train Alta is the rebranded Wimp to Warrior.
Mm-hmm.
So Wimp to Warrior is a program where like people do like 20 weeks of training, and then if they're so inclined at the end of it, they can jump in the cage and have an experience against another person out of the program, so to speak.
Yep.
I guess talk to me a little bit about that, because I'm sort of curious, in your capacity of what you were doing for them. Like, what were some of the things that you engaged with them, and then I guess what your involvement, having seen the program go through. Like, what's some of your insights from that?
Yeah, well, I mean, so it was basically, Richie Walsh was working for them, and he, contacted me to help him write the syllabus for a 20-week program they had, which was a good exercise. So what they do is take 20 people who potentially haven't trained at all before, run them through 20 weeks, 100 lessons of training in the morning, 5 days a week, and then they have a cage fight at the end. So it was a good challenge, just actually structuring a syllabus from start to finish every day with those constraints of they are actually going to have a fight at the end. Because it was interesting, because I'm sure none of the people who have been coaching it before probably had any difficulties coaching. And I think, you could probably coach and, do a pretty good job just coming in and, just on the vibe and reading the room, seeing what you feel is necessary. But then having to sit down and work out, okay, well, there's 100 lessons. What are we going to fit in? What are we going to leave out? How are we going to fit it in? How are we going to deliver it? How are they going to remember it? And coming up with practical and reasonable explanations and work behind all of those decisions was a good process to put through. And then give them a way that they can also it's being fight ready, but then also boost confidence with certain games and drills, ways that to keep let them know that they would be capable of doing it and overcome the challenges that they might have. So structuring it in ways that you would test them, but make sure that they're only being tested once they've learnt the skills to overcome the test, so that they have the ability to overcome some of those challenges that you're writing down into the syllabus for them, and just then setting that in structure.
Yep. And some of the I was fortunate enough to watch a few. I've seen plenty of Alta fights actually at some of the MMA events, and some of them are crackers. Like, you know, some of them, it's amazing what
Yeah.
some people have picked up in 20 weeks, right? Like there's, you know, there was, you know, some big throws and some big takedowns and things like
Yeah.
that. So it's quite amazing, you know, what kind of skill development people can have over 20 weeks. And every place that offers Alter has their own spin on it as well, right?
Of
Like they offer
course.
their own flavor to it. So you sort of see that in the way people approach, you know, their fight in the cage.
100%. So, and then that was also something that no matter how much you like, you know, we strictly define anything, we know that every coach is going to put their own spin on it. So leaving room for that to work, you know, effectively as well.
Yep.
Was something we had to keep in mind.
Okay, let's switch gears a bit. So, you know, we sort of seen the progression in terms of I would say more everyday life. Let's talk a little bit about the martial arts journey. So I think you mentioned you started quite late.
Yeah.
So I guess talk me through, was the first place that you trained at Lang's?
Yeah, so that was the first place I went into. And, you know, basically, as I was in high school, so Elvis Sinisic was fighting for the title against Tito Ortiz.
Yep.
And I remember that was in our local paper, the Manly Daily.
Yep.
And that was, I guess I'd probably seen a UFC tape before that as well.
Yep.
And then that was like, oh, how, like they do that just down the road. Like, you know, I remember, you know, seeing a tape, it was just so foreign that like it didn't compute that there would be people in Australia doing it. So that was something I remembered just down the road. And then one of my friends at high school actually started training there and, you know, and was talking about it. And then eventually that's where I ended up going to essentially. And what was cool actually at one point is the friend who had trained at Lang's when I was in high school, he actually came back one day while I was the coach there now.
No
and
way.
It was like, oh, Louis,
Yeah,
good
wow.
to see you, man.
Yep.
You know, so that was cool. I could be like, oh, thanks. You know, I remember
Bringing on this journey.
we reminisced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Listen, I think there's one of the cool things about that story is, right, it's, you know, it's the whole adage about, you know, what's the difference between a white belt and a black belt is the guy that hasn't stopped going or hasn't stopped training, right?
Yeah. I mean, and, you know, that's, I think, you know, it's a necessary thing, obviously, to achieve anything. You can't stop, you can't quit. But, you know, I also think that you have to put a bit more value into black belt as well. You know, showing up's the bare minimum, but you have to keep showing up, you know.
Yeah, yep. Yeah, it's one of those things that I think, you know, a lot of people when they first start something, they go all in, right? Like they're gung-ho, they're there, you know, 5 times a week, whatever the case may be. And then over time, it's like they feel like they can't sustain that.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, one of the big things, I like this adage of consistency over intensity. You know, it's not about going to the gym and blowing yourself out for going 120% lifting weights that you shouldn't have lifted and then being so sore the next day, the next few days that you can't go back to the gym for another week. It's about, you know, probably working out to 70, 80% of your capacity so that you can still come back and get more work in and get more reps in by being back every day of the week as opposed to just doing, you know, a hard session, blowing yourself out once and then coming back.
Yeah.
So I think the same thing applies to mentality, right? Like if you start with what's, I guess, achievable within your own weekly priorities, right? Like, you know, people with family, you might not be able to go every single day of the week, but you can maybe say do 2 or 3 lessons a week, you know, and having that consistency and that routine is probably paramount to that.
Yeah, and then I think that's, you know, partially the role of the coaches sometimes to, you know, regulate just exactly how much people can do so that they don't intentionally burn themselves out, and then, you know, just keeping an eye on that. But yeah, it's very possible for someone to come in and just absolutely just go gung ho and then stop doing it. You know, we see it all the time.
The blue belt blues.
Yeah. You know, it's part of a reason, I think.
Yep. Okay. So then, do you remember your first day at Lang's? Like, you know, that first day when you walked in. Do you remember what you guys did? How did you find the training? Was it tough?
Okay, yeah. So I remember maybe it was first jiu-jitsu. 2 things I remember, like, where am I supposed to sit? It's a common thing, you know. And the other thing was I rolled with one of the black belts. Maybe it was brown at the time. It could have been black. Gavin, and like he just tapped us out 5 times in probably 1 minute,
Yeah.
and it was like, what just
What is
happened,
this? Yeah.
and then I was hooked on it. So it's probably a familiar story. I think, the people from that, that time and before that time, that was kind of what made people stick around if they got smashed and then thought, I want to learn that as well.
Yep.
So, and which is probably a different personality, because you can still teach it to people if they get smashed and they go, this is awful.
Yeah.
I don't want to do this. If you can still teach jiu-jitsu to those people, but not necessarily with that introduction.
Yep. No, absolutely. Okay. So then from a teaching perspective, and I guess the reason why I asked this question is because, when you would have first started, there would have been a very specific teaching style, and you talk referencing it in terms of people getting smashed and experiencing the difficulties of training. How have you found that sort of change over the years? Like, I guess, when did you sort of think that, okay, for my own teaching style, it's probably not the best thing to introduce a beginner by absolutely smashing the crap out of them?
Yeah, so, I think as a whole, it's been changing over the last couple of years. So as much as I'd say that like my individual ways of coaching have developed itself, I think at least in the circles that of people I talk to and everything like that, it has been changing, in a wider area. Partly driven by, the accessibility of information, the traditional class structure of, maybe warm up 10 minutes, just dead drilling for maybe 30 minutes and then roll for 20 at the end, and then the drilling 3 techniques and then just going live. I think I don't see many people actually still doing that. There might be some that I'm just not familiar with.
Yep.
But as much as we refer to that as as a way that needs to be left in the past, I actually see it. I think most people have actually moved on from that. I might be wrong. It just might not be places that I see, and it could be self-selecting. But I think a lot of places are looking to try and update things as well.
Yeah, well, I think it's about engaging people, right? Like, and I can give you this example from my training. So I started training Kung Fu when I was around 14.
Mm-hmm.
So I did karate from 5 to 12, and then had a couple of years break, and then started Kung Fu. And I really loved the training. It was like there were 2-hour sessions. So from that perspective, like, I think, and Liam and I talked about this because he's got like a karate background too, how in the more traditional styles, there's generally been a better structure that in terms of like health and well-being as well, because you do, your warm-ups, your stretching, everything's sort of accommodated within the class, like your conditioning elements as well.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, in jiu-jitsu, it's sort of like bar you maybe do a jog around the room and stretch out your arms and some rolls down the mat or something like that. After class, it's like you finish your rolls and people just pack up and go home. You don't really stretch and worry about your strength and conditioning or your flexibility or anything like that.
Yeah.
Which can, generate future problems, if you never go and address it, or you never do anything to compensate for the specific sort of contracting work that you're doing when you're playing guard or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, 100%. And it's something that, definitely has to. I mean, we should always be doing more of it in jiu-jitsu. Yeah, it's just like, and it's hard when especially the younger, just younger people don't see the need or benefit for it. But I remember I actually did Taekwondo for a little bit, and like after I'd been doing jiu-jitsu, and like we spent so much time stretching like the legs, to be able to kick and everything. And I'm like, okay, I get it. Like, we would spend a half an hour every lesson warming up, stretching, and it felt good.
Yep.
You helped with your kicks. You felt good. I think there's more part of the issue is jiu-jitsu is just so fun to actually do that it's like it's very difficult to hold people back from that. So it's finding that balance.
The balance, yeah. And I think that's also the problem is with just rolling all the time is that you don't necessarily improve your skills either. There's so many things that can happen in a roll that unless you're really taking the time to slow down and go, okay, in this position, this is what happened, and as a result, I got passed or I got crushed or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that I've sort of become really big on is positional sparring. Like, I think that's a really good way to sort of cut things down and just get to the meat of it, rather than spending, 4 minutes of your roll trying to get chest to chest. Let's start chest to chest and go from there. and then go 1 for 1 so that, you know, you can try and get out and I can try and get out and we're both working on our technique at the same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'd really like to, you know, and sometimes I find it easier to do with MMA for whatever reason than, but do like whole classes, just positional work. Because I think that's the better way to do it. We do it in wrestling, but it's just, there's that element of in jiu-jitsu where it's just like, oh, it's just fun to do a free round, or, you know, that kind of makes it difficult because that's kind of what people seem to want. But
gotta try this move I saw on Instagram.
100%, and I get it. It's fun. You know, that's you know, you gotta let it be fun as well. But I think I'll do it with MMA because it's just for whatever reason it's easier. People are more geared for competition, so they can see the benefit. But yeah, just the whole time should be positional, and then maybe once a week bring it together.
Yep.
But yeah, positional work is how you get good, really.
Yep.
Or isolation,
Okay, let's talk about fighting for a bit.
Mm-hmm.
So you obviously had quite a few fights in your time, and I guess what made you want to fight in the first place?
I guess it was just you were training, and it was just like, well, okay, what are we training? Well, yeah, may as well have a fight.
Yep.
It was kind of just the progression. It was certainly encouraged by training partners. I think Rob Hill and Nick Pudney probably both encouraged me.
I've trained with Rob before.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So I was training with them. They'd had fights, and I think, and there was a group of us. We were all gonna let's all have our first fight together, kind of thing.
Yep.
So it was a social kind of thing to do.
Yep.
And then I think I won the first one.
Yep.
I think won first two, and then so it was. Well, once you win, it was, well, I better have another one then.
Keep going.
Yeah, and then when I lost the first one, it was, well, I want to get a win after that, so it just kind of kept going, for a little bit. Yeah, it just started training. The opportunity was there. It just seemed like a good thing to do, and I'd be lying if I said in the back of my mind when I started training, it wasn't like an idea.
Okay.
That it could happen.
Yep.
I didn't go. I probably did just go in for get fit, do something fun, build confidence and everything. But probably in the back, I'd watched the UFC, so I knew, this is pretty cool.
Yep. Did you view it as like a bit of a test for yourself?
Definitely. I feel it's like at one point I remember thinking it's like a test. It's an internal test of how disciplined you've been and how well you've been training and how well you've been focusing on it. And then that's what it's actually testing of the skills. So it's a bit of a checklist of, how well have you been preparing? How well have you been paying attention? How well have you been focusing? And of course, maybe now it's also, there is the other person in there and there's things out of your control and everything like that. But I remember at the time very much thinking that it's very internally driven test. And I guess that's probably, I think to be a fighter, you have to be a bit selfish or just in that process because it has to, when you have a fight coming up, your life kind of has to be all about that fight. Otherwise you're not taking it seriously.
Yeah, no, 100%. Do you remember the first fight when you were walking out? What were your feelings like? I guess, were you scared?
It was surreal in terms of it was like a tunnel vision, like a movie or whatever. But it was just a very surreal feeling. Just standing the ref in there and the person across the ring, and it was just surreal. Kind of just didn't feel, and it was just all on autopilot too, which is probably you'd recognize. It's just like it wasn't thinking; it was just all autopilot instinct of actually, once the bell rang, especially.
Yep. No, absolutely, and it's a roller coaster of emotions, isn't it?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's the highest of highs, the lowest of lows, and how's the middle? Yeah, they're all right, definitely. And then winning, it was like crazy. But, I think that, thinking back on the, when you fight, when it just does feel like instincts that is actually fighting, and you're not consciously going step 1, step 2, step 3 of the techniques. It is just that operating on instincts, which backs up a lot of the idea behind doing more positional sparring and live work. Is that you're not going to build those instincts just from repetition. You're going to have to build those instincts from actually moving through the positions with a resisting opponent, and I think that's where it kind of links up.
Yep. What's the steps to conscious competence?
So,
the first step is that you're unconsciously incompetent. You don't know what you don't know.
Exactly.
And then you become consciously incompetent. You realize, hey, shit, there's a whole lot of things that I don't know. And then you sort of get to this point where you have this unconscious competence where, you know, you're doing the right things, but you don't really know necessarily why. And then you get to this idea of conscious competence where it's like, okay, I know exactly what I'm doing. I know the reactions that I'm going to get, and I'm going to get there because my mind's switched on and I'm here in the game and this is what I'm going to achieve.
Exactly.
And it's funny because, you know, I feel like you have to be so dialed in to be in that phase of conscious competence at all points in time, because it's so easy to then slip back into that that third step of being unconsciously competent, where you're not really thinking about what you're doing and go, oh, it's working. But then it's like, it's only working because you're making the assumption that you're going to get the same reactions every single time.
Yeah.
And that's the difference between having that focus to be switched on in that conscious competence phase is like, okay, somebody can give me a totally different reaction, but I'm still dialed in enough to then go and recognize that and go, okay, this is what I'm going to switch to as a result of that.
Mm-hmm.
And it has to happen so fast from an instinctive perspective, right?
Yeah. Well, that's, you know, when it's running on instincts, it's not even thought about. You know, you're not making that decision. It's just you're reacting and you react to your training.
Mm. Out of curiosity, you know, when you experienced the losses, what was your mindset around, you know, going away from that and coming back stronger? Like, I guess, how did you approach it? Were you like, I need to go back and review the footage and do some work or positional work, or how did you approach it?
Well, I mean, I think the first one, we'd never got the footage, you know. So, you know, I think I was just determined to like, oh, well, I like the feeling of winning, and then the feeling of losing sucked. So I wanted to write that and, you know, win again. So that was, you know, the motivation really. I mean, technically I always just felt like I had to improve in every avenue kind of thing, and just keep turning up to every class and just trying to learn as much as I could, because there was still so much that I didn't know. So I just, that was basically what I did. Just keep turning up to class, like not taking time off, or, you know, think like, you know, Anthony would say, you know, have a week off and then come back. So it was just, you know, do that and then back to training and just trying to train, pay attention, learn as much as we could.
And then, so then how did you come to the decision that, hey, you know, you've had enough of fighting? Yeah.
So, well, that's in the last fight I had, I broke my arm in the middle of the fight. So, and I've still got still plates and screws in this arm blocking a kick. And
aren't you supposed to take the plate out?
I can go back and get it taken out if I want to.
Okay.
They said I can leave it in if I want. It depends if it gives me problems. And I just don't necessarily want to go back in and have the other surgery.
Yep.
The only thing is sometimes holding pads at the right angle, it'll hit it and I'll be like, ding.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That'd suck for the partner, wouldn't it?
Oh, well, they don't feel it. It's just in the,
Internal.
me feeling it. Yeah.
Okay.
So that I might eventually go get it removed. But again, it's the same thing why I haven't had it done. I don't want the surgery and the time off.
Yeah.
So it was that, and then, you know, on the drive home to the hospital, realizing that, you know what, let's move into coaching or tennis, you know.
Fair. Okay. So how did the Sonny Brown breakdown start then?
Yeah. So that was, I mean, part of it, I think the first thing I actually did was on YouTube. So part of that was just like watching other breakdown channels. There was really only two, BJJ Scout and Jack Slack.
Lawrence Kenshin. How can you?
Lawrence Kenshin. Sorry. Oh. Yeah, no, that's right. That's right.
Striking breakdowns.
Yeah, striking breakdowns. I guess I was just thinking MMA. Oh no, he did MMA. I can't save it. Sorry, Lawrence Kenshin. Yeah, so watching those channels, and I was like, I reckon I could give that a shot, you know. And then eventually going into it. So, one thing, the very first video I did was, I called it the leg mount ride, which is now interesting because leg riding in jiu-jitsu is now more a common phrase. So definitely was onto something there without a doubt. But it was the trap that Habib does of the legs. So the reason I chose that position specifically is, one, I could see its value. I'd seen Shinya Aoki do it a lot before, so I'd been paying attention to it before, so I knew a bunch of the instances where it had been used in other bouts. And then also no one else had covered that that position at all, really. So for many years, that was the only resource available talking about that position, other than Shinya Aoki's instructional. Sorry, and let's see, it's all coming back to me. And Randy Couture put it on one of his things.
Okay,
but maybe covering it in such depth. Yeah, so, and that allowed it to actually kind of get a bit of attention, the fact that, it was a bit different and that no one had kind of covered that position or something. So I was actually able to, get a few eyeballs on it that made it worthwhile doing more.
Yep. Okay. And so then how do you draw inspiration for the stuff that you do?
Yeah, so, I mean, just whatever takes my fancy, kind of. Or just, things I'm looking at. And I'm still always just trying to see, like, okay, if there's something that, something that's covered out there that's already been covered 1,000 times, I'm not necessarily inspired to redo it. So I'm nearly always just looking for something that's unique, maybe hasn't been covered, or, if there is something that has been covered, how can I cover it a different way, take a different angle on it so that it can, again, try and just make it more engaging to people. Because I think if it's like the same thing that people have seen before, then it's sometimes hard to keep that attention.
Absolutely. Yeah, like so I do a little bit of the fight analysis myself. And when I started it, I was like, I just want to work on my ability to articulate ideas. So, selfishly, like I sort of do it more for me than anyone else. And then when it started to get a little bit of traction, it was just weird. And it was just like, okay, people want to come along for the ride? No worries, let's go. We'll go on this ride together.
Yeah.
So then I thought, okay, well, there's a couple of things that happened. One was, so I used to put all my content just on the Johnny Apps channel. And then once I made that move into politics, like that just absolutely tanked my channel. So I learned very quickly, I actually need to separate my channels out.
Sure. Yeah.
So then I separated out the martial arts channel, and it's like, okay, got to start again. Like it's just basically start from scratch. Like I still kept all the other martial arts content up on the Johnny Apps channel, but now it's like I got to rebuild this whole new channel. And rebuild a brand new audience for it as well. So that's it's fun. Like it's different.
So did you keep the original Breakdown channel? Did you just change that to your politics channel?
I changed. No, so
or you created a new one.
I created a new one for martial arts. So the martial arts one has started again.
Yeah.
And the podcast, and because I used to throw the podcast, the politics, even stuff in the automotive industry, all on the one channel.
Yeah.
Because I was lazy. Like I had this sort of. The real reason is like I was making good money in the automotive industry, and I was like, this is just a hobby, it's a passion project. I'm not really fussed about how it goes, blah blah blah. And then now I'm no longer working in the automotive industry. It's like, okay, I probably need to start thinking about how I can actually turn something over from this.
Yep.
The podcast is a little bit different because I never started it with the intention to make money. It started because I had a friend commit suicide, so that was one of the reasons. And selfishly, me looking at my own kids and realizing that, for me as a son, I didn't really take a lot of time to understand what my parents had gone through in life, and like there's a pretty clear moment is when I was 35, because that was when my friend Adrian committed suicide. That when he passed away, I really started thinking about that I didn't really appreciate, all the things that my parents had done. And I, up until this point, I never really cared, right? And then, but once you start caring about it, you can't uncare. I can't turn the switch off and go, hey, I want to go back to the way I was. No, like now I suddenly care about it. So when I started the podcast, it was like, okay, I want to make sure that I get a chance to sit down with my dad and ask him all these questions. And so I managed to do that in the 3rd episode, which was great. Because, for the longest time, I had thought they'd met in one country and it was a completely different country. Right. My dad actually got upset with me because, like, I've never been to Taiwan, like, because I thought they met in Taiwan and they actually met in New Zealand.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Right? And then you sort of, you read between the lines a little bit in terms of like, okay, how did things transpire between my parents? It's like, okay, they met and I think like a year or two after my brother was born. And, they got married somewhere in between that. Like I don't know the specifics of dates, but you sort of, you go, oh, okay, that's actually happened on a much faster time frame than I expected.
Yep.
And then there's 7 years between me and my brother, and you sort of like, you start to piece these things together, and it helps you to understand that, hey, when you're growing up, your parents didn't really have it all together either. And, so when I started the podcast, it was like, okay, selfishly, maybe one day when my kids might be 35 or something, they might suddenly care, and then they've got this resource to go back through and listen to all these other people's stories and potentially hear some of my stories, mixed in with those as well.
Yep.
And And I guess I think one of the best things about, you know, me doing this podcast is that it's allowed me to really move away from having a compartmentalized life. Like, so I used to say, like, there was the version of me that was at work. There's the version of me that's at training in the training rooms. There's a version of me that's at home. There's a version of me that's with my friends.
Yep.
And now it's like it's all me, right? And they were always all me.
Yep.
But I think it takes a different kind of courage to be able to be transparent about all that.
Yeah, no, I feel you on that, because that was actually, thinking back now, part of the reasons why I didn't like IT is and you know, office work is because it was a very different kind of person working IT and working in the office, and then it was too dramatic a shift. I think that it was like, well, it'd be better if you know how you know I was operating the world was more aligned, like through the entire week, rather than you go into the office and it's just such a different world kind of thing.
Yeah, and so like one of the things I started to really think about, I think it was like there was a couple of things that happened. I think one was like I started to listen to a lot of podcasts as I was driving. So I used to travel, you know, an hour each way for work. Mm-hmm. So that allowed me to then consume a lot of content in a very short period of time. And then, you know, my little sneak tip for everyone that likes consuming podcasts is to listen to them on 2-speed. Yeah. So then you get 2 hours in a value in one. So I'd be able to finish, you know, a Joe Rogan episode in a drive.
Yep.
And, you know, it allowed me to catch up on heaps of episodes. And then also, you know, start listening to other people's episodes and other people's content. And so I just started consuming a whole bunch of content. And for the longest time after I finished uni, I was like, I never want to go back and study again, you know, and it was like the worst mindset you could ever have, because in life, if you're actually not growing, you're just slowly dying. Right? Sure. And everybody reaches this point in life where, like if you're not really engaged in trying to improve yourself or learn things, like what are you doing? You just basically, you're standing still, but as you're standing still, time's still moving forward. You're just dying.
Yeah, that's what, yeah, sure.
Right? So then I went on this whole thing, you know, this whole journey of like, you know, trying to learn more and also sharing those concepts with my staff, like the people that were working with me in the businesses and things like that. And so that's sort of what sort of influenced my mindset in terms of how I then started to approach things. And I think then looking at ways to then transfer or translate those learnings that you learn, whether it was in the workplace or in martial arts, and translate them between each other. You know, there are lessons that you learn in martial arts that then you can go and instill back in the workforce. Yeah. And vice versa. And I think that's where it's the Miyamoto Musashi quote of, you know, when you see the way in one thing, you see it in everything. Mm-hmm. You know, so if you have the capacity to get good at one thing, you've got the capacity to get good at anything. You just have to actually want to do it. Yeah. Yeah.
And want to do it. And there is also, you know, have the resources, be in the right place, you know, have access to the right, you know, people around you who will support you and stuff like that. So that, you know, there are those other things, but it's none of that is going to make a difference if you don't want to do it yourself.
Yeah. So then the catalyst for your podcast, like what? Yeah. I think you started around the same time as me. So yeah, okay. 2019.
Yeah, I guess. I think like, so, I mean, a big catalyst was the first lockdown in which allowed me to record a lot of episodes because people were just sitting around. And so I was able to reach out to a lot of people and get in touch with people who were sitting around the world and do it like that. I mean, the first thing was, but I'd recorded, I think, 2 episodes before then. And I think I just wanted to try it. Like a lot of the stuff that I do is looking at something. So yeah, you know, listening to podcasts before and thinking, you know, that'd be cool. I might try that. And then thinking about, okay, well, what, you know, how am I going to do this and what angle and how am I going to present it so that it's, you know, it can engage people and be useful and valuable to people. So that's where I took, you know, okay, I've been doing teaching and, you know, training and, okay, health, education. All right, let's make that kind of the focus of how I'm going to do it. So the first interview was with Jared Dell, who was I knew he was a high school teacher and, you know, jiu-jitsu, and, you know, okay, you know, how do you reconcile the two? And then I think what was probably a big one? I think it was the second or third. Was Preet Mikkelsen, which I watched one of his seminars, and I was like, I don't know if I completely agree with everything this guy's saying.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let me reach out to him, and I'll see if I can ask him those questions I have.
Yeah.
And it was awesome. Like, and I've spoken to him heaps of times since. I get along with him, but it was just the ability to do that was like, wow, this is pretty incredible. Okay, I want to try and keep doing this as much as possible.
Yep.
And then just, keep having that angle, or, just try and give a way that the people listening to it each time they, are going to learn something, or maybe not even so they'll learn something, but so that if they want to learn about a particular topic, each episode could be a valuable resource for it.
Yeah, I like that. So I listened to your quite a few of your episodes, but the whole ecological based learning. I think that's a very a great concept from the perspective of when I think back on a lot of my development in grappling. It was actually around I guess the style of learning that I went through was I was just rolling for the sake of rolling for a very, very long time, as opposed to doing any class and things like that. And it was actually so Dex. Shout out to Dex and fire out. Like, Dex gets a lot of shout outs. If you got any shit talking stories on Dex, you gotta share one.
Drex.
Yeah. Yes, Drex the Destroyed, I call him. The made in China version of Drax the Destroyer. For people that don't understand what we're talking about, so we had a John Danaher seminar at VT1, and Sonny stitched Dexter up because I was sitting next to Dexter, and Sonny's pointed directly, and Dexter said to me, "Is Sonny pointing at me?" And I was like, we looked, and I looked behind who was behind Dexter, and I go, yeah, I'm pretty sure he's pointing at you. And then lo and behold, Dex was the UK for John Danaher.
Yeah, he asked, and I don't know if it's a good or a bad thing. If you give someone that role, it could be either way, but it's going to be a unique experience. And Dex said he would be UK for me lots of times when I coach. So I was like, I guess is this a reward? I don't know. Like, here you go.
So how Drex came about was partway through the seminar after Dex had probably been choked about 50 times. JD started calling him Drex for whatever reason, and then it stuck. We all started saying, "Oh, Drex." So anyway, that's the Drex story. But so Dex was one of the reasons for me getting more involved in grappling because I'd been doing kung fu for a long time, and I think he just started at VT1, and we used to go to each other's houses and roll. And so we just do a lot of rolling. Like, it wouldn't be like we wouldn't be teaching each other anything. It'd be like he'd be trying stuff that he'd learnt, and I'd be trying to counter it with whatever things came to my mind, right? So that's the whole unconscious incompetence thing. Is like you're sort of doing things, but you're not really understanding the reasons why. And as a result of that, like, I developed a whole bunch of different things that I did, but didn't really understand the reasons why. And when I started doing more formal grappling training, so I ended up doing a lot of training with Dave Tong and Steve and what they'd call the Midgets crew at Integrated Combat Center. So they used to do open rolls on Sundays. Mm-hmm. And so through one of my mates, Jason, who used to do Kung Fu, but he also won Masters Purple Belt Worlds. He used to go there as well. And so then I used to go there, catch up with him, do some rolls. And here I was, like, this ungraded guy just rolling with a whole bunch of black belts and high level belts. And so, as a result of that, you build very high-level reactions as a result of that. So the whole, I guess the thing behind, ecological learning, it resonates for me because I kind of like that. I like that it's like, okay, if we talk broadly about what are some of the main themes of what we need to do here, and then you find your own way to express those themes and counter, what's also being done to you in return. I feel like you can get quite good doing that, but there also comes a point where you need help. Yeah,
that's one thing that it's like, I don't think you are going to harm people if you guide, every now and again you say, hey, do it like this instead of this. And I guess if you take a strict approach, yes, because then you are interfering with someone's style and personal expression of themselves.
Yep.
But if you know their goals are to get better and, win and things like that, then, and there's certain fundamental things that an easy fix, I don't think you're doing a great disservice to them by actually showing them a bit of technique.
Yeah.
I find it difficult to take a strong stance on that. There, and look at it like there is a spectrum of teaching styles, different to learning styles. That it can be delivered. So at some point, each one of those styles is going to be useful in teaching a certain thing. So the benefit of like strict, let's just say military style drilling and replication is you can get a lot of work done in a limited amount of time. So you can, boom, you can set people to a clock if it's strict. Okay, I want 10 of these done every minute. Boom, 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 and eventually, in that use of time, those lessons will stick. Now, that's not saying that that's the best way.
Yeah.
Saying that maybe in certain scenarios that will be the most efficient use of time. But then it's also getting people along to a point where they can learn certain techniques themselves or through guided discovery or convergent discovery. Or just, and like play would be just another way, and then that's going to be good for certain times itself. I find it difficult to just draw a line in the sand and say, no, it only has to be one way or it.
So, I think it was the last podcast that you did with Greg.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was, for people that are listening, if you are interested in what we're talking about, have a listen to Sonny's podcast with Greg, because I found it interesting, like, I think he made like a point about, that means when he's coaching, like he'd give very broad based advice from the corner. So it might be like, chase the hips or something like that.
Yeah.
Which I found interesting because like I like sort of, I wouldn't say it's a blended approach, but I think you need to know the names of positions, because then if you're trying to get a specific heuristic, you want the fight to go in a specific direction. I'd like to be able to say Ashigarami and have somebody know exactly where they're going. Or I'd like to be able to say, it's a crab ride and know exactly where they're going versus, chase the hips. And, I don't know. What do you think?
Well, that's, I don't think it does that much harm. I mean, I do like in terms of coaching someone from the sideline, I do actually like the way that he was describing what he does, just giving external cues. Because I have read some research that backs up that is the best way to do it. So I'm kind of on board with that. But in terms of like the abandonment of all traditional names itself, I feel like is just, it's a waste of time. Or I don't think it's very efficient. Like to think that, people are going to know the guillotine by the guillotine. We all know what you're referring to when you say it.
Yep.
It's just easy. I kind of feel like it's 10th Planet all over again.
Well, so the thing I think why you need to have the vocabulary is like even when you like say in sparring practice in MMA, right? People get into a grapple. If I can't quickly articulate to them, hey, knee cut, do this, do that, like advance your position, like in a specific direction. By calling out the name of the move, like if I wouldn't know how else to articulate it if I was going to say, okay, left knee up to the armpit. It's like you want to be able to give very specific advice that somebody can just go, okay, boom, and then they do the move, and then it feels like you're playing a PlayStation.
Yeah,
right? They do the move as you see it, because sometimes if you're watching from the sidelines, you see it in a better view, and you can see what the other person's trying to do, and like it's weird because some people say, oh, okay, but if you're cornering and the other person can hear what you're doing, they can try and shut it down too. So
I mean, but sometimes I've been cornering and hearing the advice the other person's giving, and it's frustrated me so much because it's accurate.
Yeah.
That like it made me get in my own head kind of thing. Because it's like he's going for the triangle, and it's like I am going for the triangle. Like, and then you start, and then it takes you out of the match.
That's right.
Yeah. So there is a little bit of a there could be some gamesmanship with that as well.
Yeah, it's actually that takes me back to like I was watching. I was at one of the fighters out of the kickboxing gym that I go to, Zane. We're in Melbourne for his fight, and he's fighting Tony Jagged, and it was a corner battle. So Dan, our coach, and Tony's corner. Like they'd be saying what moves were coming next, and it'd be like so they'd call out something, we'd call out something, and both fighters would just be going at it at the same time. And it was like wow, it's literally like playing PlayStation when you have like. It only works if the fighter is in tune with the coach as well.
Yeah.
But the fact that it can be such an advantage to have such a good corner that giving you good advice. It's just one of those things that I think people don't really appreciate when you watch when you're watching and you don't really get to hear the corners go at it.
Yeah, definitely. So, and that's where, I think code, for professional fighting anyway, like having a couple of codes is good as well. So, like, just not traditional names. Doesn't have to be fancy. I mean, when I was fighting, Blue was one of the ones we had. I remember, it's just like, a couple of easy shorthand things that then they can't. The other corner doesn't know, and it can either just be it can be combinations shortened as well, because it's better, to just your economy of words is a good way of putting it. Just shorten the amount of things that you're having to say to get the message across.
Yep. Do you think I'm just curious whether that overcomplicates things.
It can.
Yep.
I mean, a classic one was when Eddie Alvarez was fighting Conor McGregor, and poor Mark Henry was just yelling, I think it was like 76. And like, who knows what that was, but it was just like...
It's not happening.
Yeah, I just remember old 76 wasn't going that day.
I suppose it's better than, was it Edmund Taveri?
Yeah, head movement. So like, I think sometimes, you can... It depends on the amount of work that's done prior in the training rooms beforehand. So I think a lot of coaches, like, you could easily put together a complicated code for your particular moves and stuff like that, and overcomplicated it as a way to glorify your own coaching ability. So you can kind of use it, that's your time to shout out stuff, your time to, maybe the cameras are on you. As a coach, that, some people could be tempted to bump up their own ego by like giving by complicating things, putting the camera on them and making it about how well they're giving advice in the corner. Code words could play into that.
Yep.
Where it's just, knowing the fighter, what works best for them, and making sure it's all about them, because they're the ones who are going to have to, they're the ones putting it on the line, and they're the ones who are going to have to actually execute in the cage or the ring. Yeah,
no, absolutely. When it comes to game planning, so obviously you got a few guys out of here that fight. What's the process here in terms of how you guys approach it? Like, do you do specific work where you you study the opponent, and then you do specific drills that focus on that? Yeah,
definitely. And I mean, the biggest thing at this level is the amount of footage or information we actually have on the opponent, right? Yep. So, I mean, it's pretty simple in that it's, one, what is our fighter's A game? Mm-hmm. How can we keep them in their A game? That's the default, right? And then it's, what's the other fighter's A game? Yep. How can we move them out of their A game? And that's and then it all flows from there pretty much. Yep. So, at this level, where you don't have hours or heaps of fights, perhaps, of fighters that you can study, then that's generally what it is. If they did have that amount of footage available, then it's, we're watching all the fights that they have available, watching for habits, watching for tendencies, watching for weaknesses, and then building drills around that.
Yeah. No, it's something that I really appreciate. I guess that's a lot of where my focus is when I do fight analysis, is that I'm looking at things I find interesting. And generally the things that are interesting to me are when there's specific exchanges that might play out multiple times throughout a fight. Yeah. Because that's like a specific battleground that, they're jostling for who's going to win these particular exchanges. And you don't necessarily always get that if it's a short fight. Like I think I actually enjoy the 5-rounders more than I enjoy the ones that are over in 1 or 2 rounds, because now I got an ability to then sit down and watch, when this scenario plays out, and it might play out, say, 7 times, but who wins the exchange out of those 7? Somebody might win it 5 times out of 7, and the other person's only won it 2 times out of 7. What are the reasons why? Yeah. I think that's the, I don't know, I guess that's what I find interesting.
Yeah. So I think it's just the main thing at a basic level, because it's hard to articulate it without any specifics, but it's finding those habits, right? So, and we know that, so you obviously want to try and ideally find habits over multiple fights. If something just happens once off, then it's not something you can build a game plan around and be sure that you'll be able to capitalize on it. But if it's a habit that's ingrained, the fighter keeps doing it, and then, that could potentially be something you can capitalize on. There's also a potential that they change it between one fight and the next. But if you see it keep happening, then that's what we're going to try and look to capitalize on, and see how our A game can capitalize on those habits.
Okay. So, out of curiosity, you know, when your socials started to pop off, right, and you're starting to generate this large amount of following and things like that, like, how did I guess there's two parts to the question. The first part is when you started to find that success, like I guess how did that make you feel? And then the second part of the equation is then, you know, with this platform, like I guess what do you try and do with it from there? Like, you know, you obviously generated a market where there's people interested in what you've got to show and what you produce. How do you then continue to I guess, whether does that influence you or do you not allow that to influence what you do?
Good question. In that, I mean, it has to influence me in some way, right? Even if I'm not thinking about it, it probably must. I mean, the main thing I'm just trying to do is just keep doing what I'm doing, but which is setting out to just try and do stuff that one I'd find interesting first. So I still don't find myself doing things that it's like as if it's turned into work that I don't enjoy doing. But then also provide something of value that is like, okay, this is cool if someone sees it, and that they probably won't be able to see it elsewhere or something like that. That's kind of that's just the main goal. If I can just keep doing that, do something cool that some people will enjoy, then I'll be happy with that.
There's a saying like what was old is what's new was once old, right? So I guess a lot of techniques that we might be finding arriving in the scene have actually been things that have been done before, so to speak. But there's also obviously room for innovation. But do you generally find that there are things that you find that are old that are making a resurgence? Yeah,
so that is like one thing I like looking through is old footage and just saying, oh, look, that's interesting. That's doing this or that or whatever, and then that's the latest new thing or something like that, and it could be 100 years old or whatever. But in reality, what the finishes have generally been around forever. So like the actual, like let's just say the position or the finish of a submission or something like that in grappling, or the punches, the strikes, okay, they've probably been around forever. So we can't really be surprised. But what has changed, or where the innovations is in all the setups.
Yeah, the entries.
The entries, how they're controlled, and then like the finer points of the actual submissions themselves. So it's it's interesting. You can find stuff in old manuals that look similar, or that it's the same move, but it's not really, but it's cool nonetheless.
Yeah. Okay. So let's switch gears a little bit because I want to talk to you about wrestling.
Sure.
So I think you've done quite a bit of stuff with the Wrestling Foundation as well.
Yeah. So worked with Gary a lot. Yeah.
For people that don't understand, I think Gary focuses more on folk style, right?
Correct, yeah.
So what are the differences between folk style and...
Yeah, so folk style is a sport that is practiced really only in America. There are different types, like folk style wrestling or folk wrestling around the world, but folk style is an American wrestling style that's practiced in their primary schools and high schools, even though I think it's junior, middle school and colleges there. And then once they move on from or while they're in college, I think, and then they go into the two Olympic styles of Greco and freestyle. And so folk style wrestling itself is evolved from catch wrestling, which was wrestling with submissions, and then they removed obviously the submissions to make it safer for schools and things like that, and just make it safer in general, I guess. And so part of the biggest things is you have to earn your stand-ups in or let's just say there's no parterre position in folk style wrestling. So in freestyle or Greco, where you'll see people flatten belly down, and they can still get, they can turn them for points or whatnot, but they will be stood back up if there's no action happening. If you were to do that in folk style wrestling, you'd get disqualified for stalling. So the person on the bottom is required to be attempting to make their way back to their feet at all times, and improve their position. So that I personally I enjoy watching the matches more. I think it makes it more exciting there's more action, there's more mat work. That's where a lot of the positions that are in jiu-jitsu are in folk style wrestling, just with a different take on them, as it's involved, it's concerned with pinning people. So there's just a lot more mat work involved than in freestyle or especially Greco. And And then I think, there's a lot more carryover and then from that work into MMA and jiu-jitsu. And we see it now, like so much of the jiu-jitsu back game and top game has come directly from, folk style wrestling, and you can see Craig Jones incorporating it so much more into his game. But just a lot of stuff, Power Half Nelson no one was doing that until a couple of years ago, but that was a long, that's been around for forever in folk style,
Would they call it a different name? So
No. They
not power half, but like say the position where essentially you're on the back, you got one hook in, and you go diagonal control with the power half, right?
Yeah, so it's you got a boot in, not a hook.
Okay, so that's what they call.
But
it. I'm curious.
Yeah. So that'll be a crossbody ride, leg riding. That's where they'll refer to it there.
Yep.
So there will be slightly different positional names, but for whatever reason, a lot of the names that the American wrestling or folk style wrestling names, Danaher has not renamed, or they have not been renamed. Those ones have been allowed to be kept.
Okay.
So. For whatever reason, so a lot of the things that you see in jiu-jitsu that have been taken over, they generally keep the same name.
Okay, interesting. And then so when you say so for those that don't know, so catch wrestling is a form of submission wrestling as well. Who's big on that? Josh Barnett is probably one that's very, very big on it, and there's Billy Robbins.
Yeah.
Yep. And Sakuraba was obviously probably one of the most famous catch wrestling
for sure
fighters, right? So when you take the submission element out of catch, I'm just trying to think about statistically what are the most common positions that you see in folk style then?
Yeah, so it is leg riding, back control. Starting from, I guess what the easiest way to describe it would be like a modified turtle.
Yep.
That people will be, and then on the feet it is all the takedowns, but as soon as it hits the mat, people are going belly down into a defensive turtle to try and build back up to their feet, which is now like more what you see in MMA when people get taken down. Playing guard is just less prevalent. So there's a lot of carryover from that. But catch wrestling was in maybe the first modern Olympic Games, or at least the 1908 London Games or something like that. Like catch wrestling was the first form of wrestling in the Olympic Games, and then was modified, turned into freestyle and Greco-Roman, and I think was taken out. It's been a while since I've read this, but like the first matches were like 8 hours long or something like that, and they're like, this is not happening.
It's not
again.
A spectator sport.
This is not a spectator sport. There was lots of long, boring matches where no one does anything, and they were like, let's get rid of that.
Yeah. Well, majority of the positions would probably just be the guys hand fighting, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Jostling for position.
Exactly. So, but there's a long history. But I think where we are now is jiu-jitsu is just jiu-jitsu will consume all the techniques that are useful and just make it jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
And it'll be lucky if some techniques can keep their name.
Yep.
Like the short arm scissors is the Toriko Plata, but good luck calling it short arm scissors on a jiu-jitsu mat.
I wouldn't have known that it was called a short arm scissor.
Yeah, if you're lucky, if the move's lucky, it'll keep its name. But otherwise, jiu-jitsu, it'll just rename it, and that is the power of jiu-jitsu as well. So it's just you just got to accept it for what it is.
Yeah. Well, isn't it amazing? Like in terms of jiu-jitsu, like the amount of information and knowledge that's now available, right? Like you can buy it instructional, get access to high quality content. That even if your gym isn't teaching it, like you can still consume this content and then apply it in your own training as well.
Yeah.
So from that perspective, I guess like I know you do a lot of study as well, right? Like, are there generally ways that you like to study, or is it like you're just looking for things that are interesting?
It's always just things that I think are interesting.
Yep.
Just trying to follow my interests, really. That's I just use that to guide me, and works out okay some of the time, and just use that as a bit of a guide.
Yep. Okay. Yeah. The reason why I asked that is because it's one of the things that commonly comes up in rooms is like how should you approach your jiu-jitsu study, and people have all different ideas. Like this Jeremy Skinners of the world, have a notepad and a pen, and they write down plenty of notes, and they do that sort of style. Some people watch an instructional and then try and break it down or whatever, take notes, all that, Some people video it. Some people review their footage.
Yeah.
Like there's many different ways to do it. I'm just curious about everybody's.
Sure. So yeah, and I think it very much the best way is the way that you do. Or the way that you can capably sustain. So kind of we're talking about with exercise as well. And I think that's very much with like any type of study is like writing notes is one of the probably the easiest, even if it's just a small dash in not much detail, because I will find that looking at a page will refresh your memory just as much as of that particular day, just as much as writing it out step by step. But whatever is a way that can work for the certain individual is the best way to do it. So I mean, personally, I've got notebooks that I handwrite stuff, and then I've got files of clips and stuff like that, and then typed up notes of certain things, lessons, things like that. Yep. But it's just, whichever way I can consistently do. Sometimes, just writing it down in the book is easy. Sometimes just making a clip of something and saving it is easy. So it's just whatever's got to be, allows it to be done. Okay.
All right. Well, let's switch gears for one more time. Let's talk a little bit about commentary.
Sure.
Because, we both have a common interest there. So what was the first event that you commentated?
Was, I think, a super fight MMA show.
Yep.
Yeah,
Luke Pizzuti.
Definitely. Yeah, with Luke Pizzuti.
Did you know? So you would have known Luke from CFC days, right?
Yeah. So I'd fought on CFC and trained at Lions Den a bunch. And Rob Hill used to travel out there, train there with Luke Pizzuti, and do wrestling with Justin Turtle. And that because Anthony and Luke were friends and stuff like that. So, So knew him for a while. Yep.
Okay. And so then he reached out and said, "Hey, Sonny, you want to come and commentate?"
Yeah. So obviously, I think seeing the YouTube channel and stuff like that was opened up that opportunity to do so.
Mm. Okay. And then has there been things that inform, like you've taken for your style in terms of commentary, like how you approach commentary?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to do, and again, especially at this level, it's different. I think, once you get to a stage, or, if you get to a stage where, okay, everyone knows who this person is kind of thing. But pretty much I'm just trying to tell a story of what's going on in the match. So, obviously describe what is happening in real time. So like once things start happening, you can just describe what's going on, but then relating it in a way of the description of the ebb and flow of a match. Who's leading, someone making a comeback, what are they doing to make that comeback, things along that manner. Just so it can kind of, I find that kind of keeps it going smoothly.
Yep. No, absolutely. It's an interesting one, commentary. Like there's many different styles. So, a lot of people would know Mike Chavello's voice, the Goodnight Irene guy, the big kibosh, like he's got all these one-liners that he's world renowned for. And then, you've got the Joe Rogans of the world, who everybody would know his style of commentary. And then you've got like the play-by-play guys like John Anik, and there's so many different styles of commentary that I found it very interesting getting into it, because it was like, okay, the first gig I did, I was like, okay, I don't really know exactly what I'm doing here. It's like, you listen to a few other commentators and you sort of work out, okay, these are the things that you think are important, that you need to talk about. And then the more shows you do, you start to realize, okay, I need to start to put together some of the storylines here to make it engaging for the audiences. Yeah. And then it's like, okay, now you got to work out, okay, how do you project your voice and keep people engaged without being overbearing or speaking too much? Like I think silence is actually one of the most powerful tools in commentary. Letting the action unfold, and then calling out when there's something significant that's about to happen or happening, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, and the other thing, I remember reading some stuff about pro wrestling commentary as well, and I'm like, yeah, they do a good job, because they so like just taking some influence from there as well.
Yep. I'll probably have to go back and watch some pro wrestling, I think. Yeah. People like that, and because there's a specific kind of energy that comes out of the commentators in pro wrestling.
Yeah, well, they're very specific. I mean, they're very specific how they want things done, kind of thing. Like there was more information on how to do commentary for pro wrestling, I think, when I was looking it up than just regular sports, Yep. So it was like, okay, that'll work.
All right, cool. All right, well, is there anything else you want to talk about, or?
just if you made it this far, come down, visit Apex MMA.
Yes. If people want to find Apex MMA, it's what? www.apex.
MMA.com.au.
Yep.
Yep.
And then
Muay Thai, Jiu-Jitsu, kids classes, MMA. We've got it all.
Yep. Okay. And then if people want to find you, Sonny, obviously it's at Sonny Brown.
Yeah. Sonny Brown Breakdown on Instagram, sunnybrown.net on the web. And yeah, you find everything through there.
Yep. All right. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Johnny, thank you very much.
It's been fun.
Appreciate it, mate.